All right, welcome everybody to our latest edition of Startup Grind Atlantic City. We have a really great guest this time, the NJEDA's Tim Rollender, the New Jersey Economic Development Authority. Um, Before we get into Tim's introduction, just want to talk real quick about Startup Grind, what our mission is, what our values are, so that way we're all on the same page of what we're after here and what we're trying to bring to Atlantic City and the surrounding area. So, Startup Grind as a whole is a global community of entrepreneurs and investors, innovators. There's over 600 chapters in 125 countries around the world. Our mission is to give startups the education, opportunity, and access to what they need to grow and scale their company. We pride our values. Our values are to make friends, not contacts. Give, don't take, and to help others before you help yourself. So, that's what we're trying to bring to Atlantic City, bring awareness of, the entrepreneurs that are out there and don't have a voice and don't know where to turn when it comes to trying to curate ideas and bring, bring more ideas to the table with other people that are trying to do what you're doing as well. So, with that said, I'd like to bring in Tim and have you introduce yourself, give a quick background on yourself, and tell us a little bit about yourself.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it. What you guys are doing in the southern part of the state is incredible. If I haven't said it enough, it's a fantastic platform. So I really appreciate the chance to be here. Tim Rollender. I'm the technology sector lead of the southern portion of the state of New Jersey. Basically, my work is to focus on supporting entrepreneurs, investors, attorneys, accountants, different stakeholders in the ecosystem to help them grow businesses in the state of New Jersey. Happy to dive into what all of that means, and we'll talk about that in detail. Just to introduce myself, New Jersey born and raised, from more the northern part of the state. Actually, grew up in Metuchen and Bridgewater. Went to school at Drew University up in Morristown, and then went to work at the New Jersey Division of Investment after graduation. I worked as a public equity analyst covering the healthcare space. So looking at managed care companies and healthcare facilities, anything. I don't have a science background, so anything that's kind of outside of that arena. I was there for about a year and a half, and then I was invited to join the private equity team there. Before 2004, the pension plan was entirely managed internally between stocks and bonds. In 2001, the dot-com bubble burst, and they said, look, we lost the tremendous value in the fund, so we thought we'd diversify. So they started the alternatives program. So I was part of that initial private equity team when I started in 2006 on it, $2.5 billion in the ground. When I left a few years later, we had about $9.8 billion in the ground, more than 100 private equity funds, typically $1 billion. So kind of the Blackstones and the Warburg Pincus funds of the world. From there, I just kind of, I've been doing the same thing for day and night. It's one thing that if you work in the public sector, I would arguably say you get 3 times the experience as somebody working in the private sector. You just don't need very much. You take the good with the bad. So I decided to jump ship and move into the private sector, which I just critiqued, obviously. And I went to go work for an asset management firm outside of Philadelphia, deploying capital for high net worth individuals, family offices, small institutions, charitable endowments, and the like, in the alternative space again. So I did about $200 million in about 20 funds in my time there. Across all of private equity, debt, real estate, real assets, venture capital, basically helping those investors access the alternative space when they otherwise wouldn't have the access to it. Picked up my MBA part-time at Temple University. And when I was finished with that, I had been doing private equity kind of day and night for the last 12 some years, something like that. So I could underwrite a venture fund in my sleep. So I wanted to do something different. I had kept in contact with my current boss, Kathleen Coviello, who I met in 2006 2006, we were putting to work the New Jersey Direct Fund, which is managed by then Lehman Brothers. So that tells you how far back that is, to deploy capital in the state of New Jersey specifically. Fast forward to 2018, and she said, "Look, there's an opportunity on my team to work directly with with entrepreneurs in the state of New Jersey, help them support their businesses in the tech and life science space. At the same time, had the chance to work hands-on with our venture fund portfolio. So again, doing that same alternative investment component. This time it represents kind of like 15% of my time. And I'll talk more about that portfolio as we go here. But having that experience and then the motivation to work directly with entrepreneurs, I jumped at the chance. Kind of every day is a little different. I'll work with sort of the large tech companies in the morning and a small food and beverage company in the afternoon. That's for flavors all the time. So it's been here about 6 years now. And the job's a little bit different these days since I took on the role of technology sector lead. And the EDA has undergone huge shifts over the last 3 years since Governor Murphy's come into office. And obviously, the pandemic hit early last year. Now we have the Recovery Act that was passed a couple of weeks ago. So lots of changes all the time, but love every minute of it.
Nice. So before we move on to anything further, Josh, you got anything that you want to add, or would you like to introduce yourself a little bit?
Yeah, I'll just share, real quickly that, I'm really excited to have Tim Rolander here. And I think, Tim Donovan, the co-founder of Contact Code, and myself are really excited to show and prove that there are capital allocators in New Jersey. There's actually also great founders in New Jersey. And right now, the key element of this, fireside chat, I think will be very great to describe why New Jersey is the perfect innovation space. As I've been in Silicon Valley for the past 4 years, and I've seen a lot of deals happen. And even myself as an investor, I spent a lot of time as a data scientist and an engineer. And there's a lot of tech talent in New Jersey as well. NJIT actually produces some of the top minds in the world. So does Rutgers, and so does Stockton and Rowan. But we just need to capitalize them properly and support them as founders. And there's a notion of creating more CEOs that are engineers and scientists versus MBA students. So I'm really excited to see how we can nurture that environment and raise up the next generation of young and old founders to solve great problems in New Jersey. So I'll just stop there, and I look forward to tuning in.
Cool. So with that said, you kind of touched on a couple things here and there about some NJEDA support programs. So let's try to get into some of those. NJ Ignite, the founders and funders that you guys do. So let's dive into some of those support programs that are available to entrepreneurs that are starting out, trying to get themselves funded, trying to save some money with NJ Ignite for rental assistance and all that good stuff. So take your time, jump in, and we'll dive in with any questions. Anybody that's in the audience, if you have a question or anything, just throw it up in the chat, and I will ask Tim as we move along. Sound good?
That's great. Yeah, I love questions. It definitely breaks up. I tend to be pretty monotone, so break it up. Jump in and question. I'll kind of start real high level, and then we'll talk about some of the programs. So I'll kind of give an overview of what is the EDA. I think is probably helpful for folks. Even when I started at EDA, it was a little bit of this concept. But so the EDA is the state's principal economic development agency. Every state has one. Lots of municipalities have one. But proudly, NJEDA is kind of the leading entity in the state. We were established back in the late 60s, and then spun out independently through a bond issuance back in the 80s. So while we were originally a legislated entity, today we exist with somewhat of a sort of dotted line relationship with the state, which means basically we exist on our own wherewithal. We don't receive appropriations from the state. but certain members of our board and our CEO are appointed by the governor, and our whole objective is to grow jobs in the state of New Jersey. So that's kind of the top line principle. We work with companies in all sectors and stages, from pre-revenue, early stage tech and life science startups, all the way up to the large multinationals, the Panasonics and Campbell Soups of the world, that kind of a thing. The company today has about 200 employees, probably a little bit less. While unfortunately a lot of businesses were shedding jobs over the last year, EDA was one of the businesses where we were actually adding heads, and that's partly because of our function. We were really early in the game in terms of supporting companies through COVID-19. EDA issued last year funding off of our own balance sheet, state appropriated funds, as well as we were kind of the entity managing the Federal CARES Act funding at the state level as well. So with that, it's a huge responsibility. We added a bunch of people that would be able to process that. To give you some scope, across all of our programs, in a typical year, EDA probably sees about 600 applications. Through the COVID pandemic last year, we issued 3 rounds of grant funding, and 2 rounds of loan funding, along with our entrepreneur support program and our PPE program. We received 120,000 applications. So normally, again, we support about 600 businesses. Last year was about 55,000 businesses. So it was a pretty intense effort. We were really proud to be part of the effort, and so far we're still working at that, because there's more funding coming, and there's obviously still more need at hand, basically. Like I said, EDA works with businesses of all stages and sectors. We were historically broken up as a tech and life science group versus everything else, basically. About 15 years ago, somebody recognized underwriting a pizza place is not like underwriting a biotech company. So we kind of separated the two functions. These days, and these days is kind of categorized as, when Governor Murphy came into office, he recognized, New Jersey's falling behind a little bit. And what he wanted to do was make the state the state of innovation, so to speak. So the idea was, look, let's get smarter about the businesses that we're trying to support. So instead of tech and life science and everything else, he focused on 8 core sectors, including technology and life sciences, 2 distinct sectors, but also advanced manufacturing, logistics and transportation, clean energy, certainly, not least of all, wind, the food and beverage sector, and financial and professional services. Since then, we've also added the film and digital media sector as well, actually, really important for the state of New Jersey. So the idea is, look, let's, again, get smarter about the businesses we're trying to serve, and so we can actually come in and offer more support to those businesses from kind of a grounds up focus. We don't serve in an operational capacity. It's always a financial support system. You don't want me talking to your customers, and you don't want me pulling the levers and making things work. I'm not a practical guy. I don't do that sort of thing. But so we work with, like I said, businesses to help them from a financial capacity. So if you're an entrepreneur, let's say you started a tech business, please make the EDA your first call. We're happy to understand what you're trying to do and support your efforts with, whether it's a direct investment, indirect investment, or if I could just make an introduction to, a patent attorney or an accountant or whatever, or an investor in that case. So with that said, I'll just kind of jump into some of the support systems that we have for businesses that are in that innovative end of the spectrum. And as we get further along here, I'll start to kind of weave in some of the new programs that were passed as part of the Economic Recovery Act. When I think about working with a business, I think about working with them from the very earliest stages on up. We'll see about 200, 250 businesses a year under $10 million in revenue. Half of those are kind of a guy or girl with an idea, so they're not quite a business yet. Always happy to send them to our colleagues at the Business Action Center or the NJSBDC or some of the other great institutions around the state, and help them form that business and then come back and see us, basically. When I am working with an early stage business. Usually, one of the first things that we have a chance to work with them on is, look, maybe the company is operating out of the house. Maybe it's a couple of co-founders that are operating virtually. One of the first things we can do is help them access free space in one of the state's co-working facilities. Governor Murphy came into office, and there were something like 17 co-working facilities in the state of New Jersey versus New York had over 100. Since that time, we launched the NJ Ignite program, and we've had a chance to really engage with the market of co-working spaces, accelerators, incubators, and there's more than 90 in the state of New Jersey today. If you take a look at our website, we list as many of them as we know about. If somebody does run a co-working space and they're not on the website, just let us know. We're happy to put it up there and help showcase that business. But what we also did along the way was create the NJ Ignite program. The program partners with approved facilities in the state to offer free rent to companies. So if you tell me that you're a Princeton-based company and you are a life science and you want to locate at Princeton Biolabs, which is an approved facility, the arrangement is such that Princeton will, for example, forego a month of rent to the company to locate in that facility. The company will pay 3 months of rent, and then the EDA will issue a grant to pay for the other 2 months of rent. Because Princeton Biolabs is affiliated with the university, we'll also add an additional bonus month for the company to locate there. And we can do this up to 18 months for a company, basically, to locate in New Jersey totally free.
So Dina jumped in with a question, and I know there's one at Rowan University, the tech park there. Mm-hmm. Are there any in Atlantic County? A lot of our members are I'm sure the co-working space is a huge thing. I know we've been in conversations with people about it in Atlantic City. There's a bunch of empty casinos in there, and we'd love to see some co-working spaces, but is there any in Atlantic County, or is there any planned for Atlantic County?
Yeah, really good question. It's interesting, actually. If you take a look at the NJ Ignite website, we do have a map up there and plot them all out. There's a really tight band around the New Jersey Turnpike of co-working facilities. It is really funny to see that. You can imagine different reasons. It's along a train line, happens to follow it, and it's main corridor in the state. In Atlantic County, there is the NJRTP, which is on the FAA flight campus. That campus is dedicated towards more drones and flight oriented. Obviously, it's on the FAA campus. It's not an NJ Ignite approved space, but they do have space over there. Certainly, Timmy made an awesome point, actually. Some of those casinos and there are definitely spaces in Atlantic County. It would be awesome to see somebody open up a new space out there. There's also a bonus in the NJ Ignite program if somebody opens up a new space. So that's cool.
I'll get right on that.
Importantly, I'll wrap up on Ignite in 2 seconds, so this program has been around since 2018. It was a pilot program funded off of the EDA's balance sheet. It's a $500,000 pilot program, so when the money runs out, the program is over. The program was so popularly received that it was actually baked into the recently passed Economic Recovery Act. So the allocation has gone from $500,000 to an annual budget of $250,000 for the next 6 years. So there's definitely funding available for the program. And also, interestingly, Governor Murphy, in his proposed budget for this year, baked in an additional $1 million allocation. So there's potentially $1.25 million available for companies to have free rent through the NJ Ignite program in this upcoming year. So huge support. A lot of businesses forced to be virtual over the last year. Hopefully, things open up and we can start to put more people into more spaces. Get back to normal a little bit, right?
Yeah, the biggest news about Atlantic City casinos are when they get imploded, not when they're used for different types of spaces. So we would definitely love to see some funds allocated down here. But I don't know what you had on your agenda for the next program, but a lot of myself, in my startup, we were part of the founders and funders. That was it was a very eye-opening experience for us. So maybe touch on a little bit of that. We drove up to Princeton for that, and that was one of the things why we wanted to start a chapter down here, is to see if we can get some attention down here as well. But maybe touch on founders and funders a little bit, what that is, how you become a part of that. There's definitely members that we have of our chapter that have ideas, want to get it funded, and need to figure out how to meet people that are willing to hear their ideas. So.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no, I mean, you guys, I think you had a pretty good opportunity. Princeton Biolabs, again, has a great kitchen there. That was a good, good coffee machine. Yeah, so Founders and Funders was started about in 2014, actually. So it was one of the first projects I started in 2015. They said, "Hey, Tim, manage this." And I said, "What?" So I'm a finance nerd. I don't manage events, but nonetheless, a pleasure to have it. Actually, it's a huge value in the state. So. Like I said, EDA sees about 250 companies a year. And as you can imagine, most, if not all of those companies are founders looking for capital, and they're looking for it yesterday, right? And meanwhile, New Jersey has an incredibly active angel community and a decent venture community. And not only that, there's not a lot of venture firms in New Jersey, but there are a lot of firms that happen to be right next door in New York and Philadelphia, right? That's one of the things that we are trying to do, is get more of these folks active in the state and recognize, as Josh said earlier, there's a tremendous amount of tech talent in the state. We just have to get eyes on it, right? That's part of it. Anyway, so with all those companies looking for investors, and with all those investors looking for a good deal, we found the most efficient way to kind of make some of those introductions is through our NJ Founders and Funders event, which really looks like an afternoon speed dating event. We have the opportunity to host about 30 entrepreneurs and about 20 investors, a combination of angels and VCs. EDA makes the matches. We get to know the companies. We get the sector and the stage. Meanwhile, we've been doing what we've been doing since, like I said, the 60s. So we've got a good Rolodex of investors. We're always happy to kind of make those connections. If investor A is looking for a company in the fintech space that's raising $500,000 to bring their concept into, beyond the beta stage, we can put them together with that company. Hopefully they get kind of 4 to 8 meetings in an afternoon. Sometimes they get more. Fortunately, we have a lot of interested investors. Since I started running the event, it really surprised me. The investors always fill up before the entrepreneurs do. Nobody's getting paid to attend this event. It's really, they're looking for a genuinely good deal. So the event, like I said, is typically set up like an afternoon speed dating event. Regretfully, we have not hosted the event since that Princeton Biolabs event in 2019. So you got in at just in the nick of time. And I'll kind of explain why we didn't do it in a kind of a virtual format, right? So I think part of the value of the event is giving an entrepreneur the opportunity to come in, take 2 or 3 minutes to tell their story, and then save the balance of the time for an open dialogue with the investor. And Tim, you can correct me on this one, or you can kind of share your experience. But hopefully the idea is, get a couple of tips and tricks on strategy and pitching, walk away with a business card and the opportunity to say, hey, look, since we met a few months ago, we executed on A and B, and we'd love to follow up with you on how we can get through to point C here. But I don't know, did you have a good time?
Yeah, it was definitely interesting. It was definitely stressful. Tried to prepare best I could. The EDA did a great job of sending us the list of angel investors that we were going to be meeting with, which was, that you jump on LinkedIn and you jump on as many things as possible to kind of do your due diligence on who you're going to speak with, look at their current portfolios, all those kind of things. But still, when you sit down and are sitting across from them and you're pitching them your idea for the first time, and most of the time, and at least for us, it was almost the first time we pitched it to anybody. So it was definitely nerve-wracking, to say the least, but definitely a great experience. I would highly recommend people reaching out and trying to become part of the next one, because you will, and much to their credit, they will be honest with you on how your pitch went, where the holes are in your idea, and kind of next steps for you as well. Whether that next step is back to the drawing board. As an entrepreneur, you need to hear that kind of stuff before you start throwing in all your bootstrapped money and family and friends and all that stuff. So it's a fantastic program. So any other, NJ Ignite founders and funders, what other kind of programs does the state have for budding entrepreneurs that are looking to take the next step?
Yeah, it's interesting you ask that question because it came up the other day as we are building out the Economic Recovery Act. EDA currently has, I think, 29 programs for businesses, and that list is growing, actually. So there's a lot of moving parts. I do appreciate if people do go to the website, which actually just relaunched last week. It's a little cleaner than it used to be. Part of my job sometimes is just helping people navigate the websites. So there's a lot out there. So we talked about Ignite, we talked about founders and funders. We just kind of glossed over that. That's a whole other topic of how do you approach an investor at some point. But one of the next things that we start working with folks on is the Angel Investor Tax Credit Program, and that's where the real money starts, frankly. It's a legislative program. It's been around since 2013. It was initially a 10% refundable tax credit to an investor for their investment in a New Jersey-based business. Last year, that award was increased to 20 or 25%. So 20% is the base, and there's an additional 5% bonus for businesses that are certified women or minority owned or located in an opportunity zone. And so that rate is the rate that we have today, but through the Economic Recovery Act I mentioned before, the annual allocation is increased from 25 million to 35 million. So what that means basically, I'll really break this down. If a New Jersey-based business that has 75% of their employees in the state of New Jersey at the time of investment receives an investment, their investor will receive a refundable tax credit, which is as good as cash back in their pocket for up to $500,000 or 25% of their investment, basically. The program, like I said, had an annual cap of $25 million, so we can hand out $25 million in tax credits. Last year, and your guess is as good as mine because we haven't broken down the numbers yet, it's probably a lot of people funding businesses through COVID and paying to support those businesses. We hit for the first time the $25 million cap. Before that, the program only handed out about $12 million a year. And we would normally only do 180 applications a year. Last year, we saw more than 800 applications just in the Angel Tax Credit program. So what that means is people are using the program. People are finding the value in it. If you are an entrepreneur and you're out talking to investors, I usually suggest somebody stick this in their pitch deck as a bullet in the back of the deck. Basically, you, Mr. or Mrs. Investor, may be eligible for the Angel Investor Tax Credit by investing in this New Jersey business. A smart investor will look at that and say, yeah, okay, I can get 100% of my investment for 80 cents on the dollar or 75 cents on the dollar, basically. And they'll recognize it as an immediate de-risking tool. So they don't have to wait 5 or 7 years to get their money back from an early stage company. They can get that back next time they file their taxes. So a lot of states have an Angel Investor Tax Credit program, but New Jersey's is one of the best. Initially, it was because the award amount on an absolute basis was so high at $500,000. Now it's also on a relative basis. People can get a higher percent of their investment back relative to a lot of other states out there. So this one's actually a really important program. And I'll say if somebody is a founder of a business and they own less than 80% of a business, they would also be eligible for it. The idea is, look, you're putting your hard-earned dollars into a business. Go ahead, put that money back into the business, claim that tax credit, then put that money back in the business and keep funding the business, whatever you can do to support your operations. I think somebody mentioned before, bootstrapping is important. Approaching family and friends is important. All these folks could be eligible for the program. So it's a huge tool.
We had a question does that apply relative to the Angel date? Could it have been done in the past years, or must be in that tax year?
That's a good question. Yeah, so an investor has 6 months to file for the credit from the date their money goes into the company, if it's an equity investment. If it's a convertible note, that investment becomes eligible when the note converts. So if somebody put a convertible note issuance into the company a year and a half ago, and it's just now converting, you've got 6 months from now, basically. So that's typically the case with an early stage company.
Gotcha.
Mhm.
That's great. All right, so let's jump into I know we only have 20 minutes, so we can't get too deep into the Economic Recovery Act, but we definitely want to talk about the Evergreen Fund, and probably we can start with that, and then maybe jump into any other bullet points from the act that you set aside to talk about this evening. But definitely want to start with the Evergreen Fund.
Okay, great. Yeah, I didn't even realize we were halfway through already. This is how much I enjoy this stuff. I'm such a nerd.
That's how fun it is, man.
It is. It's interesting. I mean, it's part of the job is you get to talk about all these different businesses. It's really fascinating. We didn't touch on a couple of our direct funding businesses. If anybody has any questions, they can feel free to email me. We'll talk about any of those as well. But the Economic Recovery Act has been floating around for a little bit now. And given the issues of, I guess, imposed by the pandemic last year, the bill basically received additional attention for the good that it could bring to the state, basically. The package approved a $14.5 billion incentive package that will play out over the next 6 years. It's one of the most substantial incentive packages I think the state has seen in well over a decade. So that's important to recognize. There are programs in that span from healthcare to labor to, of course, EDA was probably the biggest component of that bill. There are 15 programs in that bill that the EDA is actioning right now. We've stood up an independent team inside the EDA to help get these programs standing within this year, because that's a tremendous amount of work. Some of the programs that are created were, like I said, the legislative version of the NJ Ignite program, or modifications to the Angel Tax Credit program, or the Net Operating Loss program, which has been around for a very long time and just really keeps getting better all the time with all these improvements. But one of the big things that was included was the creation of the New Jersey Innovation Evergreen Fund. The fund is really going to be an important tool to help and motivate greater venture capital engagement in the state of New Jersey. Like I said before, New Jersey doesn't have a lot of venture firms here. At one point in history, we were 5th in the nation in terms of venture investment. Today, we're 15th in the nation. So there's a lot of folks behind us, but there's a lot we can do to catch up to where we were and beyond, basically. So the idea is to basically raise dollars by selling tax credits to large corporations in the state of New Jersey. Those funds raised will be used to invest in early stage companies in New Jersey by third-party managers, venture capital firms. It sounds sort of simple on the surface when I say it like that. It's like sell tax credits, invest the dollars. It's a pretty basic approach. The complexity with the Evergreen Fund is how the dollars are raised, and then the motivation that's going to be used to put them to work. So if you give me a couple of seconds to get on my soapbox a little bit, happy to do that. But the idea, I think Josh mentioned it before, New Jersey has a lot of technical talent. There's a lot of very smart people in the state of New Jersey. The question is always, how do you get that talent? How do you get that product that's being created right here in New Jersey? How do you get that out to the world? Commercializing a business is one of the hardest things to do. Great ideas happen anywhere, right? From the early stage startup to a department within the large corporation, basically. So the idea with the Evergreen Fund is, look, how do we make those innovations connect with those resources out there in the world? how do we get some of those resources from those large corporations to shed their light on those early stage innovations? So the idea is, look, the large corporations, like I said, purchase tax credits from the state of New Jersey, and they're going to do so by putting up, number one, a financial bid. The legislative floor is 85 cents on the dollar, but they're also, number two, going to put up some sort of strategic bid. Basically, the large corporations are going to say, look, I'm going to bid 90 cents on the dollar, basically, for these tax credits. And along with my bid, I'm going to commit to funding STEM internships in the state for the next 5 years. Or I'm going to commit 50 hours of mentorship to early stage companies that receive funding as part of the New Jersey Innovation Evergreen Fund. Some strategic value that will help boost the innovation economy in the state of New Jersey. The dollars raised from that sale every year, so every year there's going to be a $60 million allocation of tax credits for this program, up to $300 million. The hope is that we'll raise, off a $60 million sale, $50 million in tax credits. That funding will be put to work alongside venture capital managers to invest in early stage businesses in New Jersey. So if a venture fund anywhere in the world approaches the EDA and says, look, I want to be qualified to invest the Evergreen Fund money, we'll go ahead and we'll vet them. And the process will be really similar to the mechanics that we use on our existing venture fund program, which we've had for the last 20 years or so. It's been a really powerful tool in itself. And when that qualified manager says, look, I found this deal in the state of New Jersey and it meets your eligibility criteria, we'll be able to turn around and say, yep, absolutely it does. Here's your funding, basically. So basically they'll come up to us and say, okay, we want to invest $5 million in the deal. We'll say, okay, it meets the criteria. We're going to set up a special purpose vehicle where you're going to collect fees and carry, and you're going to get an extra $2.5 million to invest in this business. The typical worry with an entrepreneur is that they've got too many people, too many representations on a cap table, right? You've got too many masters to serve, and you've already got a day job trying to run a business. The beauty of the Evergreen Fund is you're taking capital from one investor, and that investor is going to leverage additional capital from the EDA. So you're only going to see that very smart investor on your cap table. That's why we picked them in the first place. So the idea also is that once those dollars are raised from those large corporations and they're put to work by those venture managers, we're also going to have the opportunity to create greater levels of engagement from those large corporates to those early stage companies. So if you have, AT&T has bought, as a New Jersey based company, tax credits, for example, and there is an early stage telco company that received funding from the Evergreen Fund, they'll have the opportunity to engage with AT&T in that case, hopefully. So, it's not to get too fluffy, but it's kind of creating that sort of virtuous cycle of innovation here, right? So you've got the resources coming down to the small companies, the innovation from the small companies getting out in the world. So that's the idea behind it. Hopefully we get to put it to work pretty soon. There's a lot of work to do, but soon.
Yeah, that's pretty interesting stuff. Any other new legislation that kind of came down to help out the innovators and the entrepreneurs? Maybe is there anything specifically allocated to our region or our area, or is it more just statewide?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, the legislation by nature is state, but there are carve-outs for specific geographic areas. The Evergreen Fund, which I just mentioned, actually has a dedicated allocation for the southern portion of the state. So that gets taken up first, followed by the northern part of the state. And there are carve-outs for Atlantic City and Camden in the southern portion of the state as well for some of these other programs too, actually. The other program that's really the big program to come out of the Economic Recovery Act is called NJ Emerge. If folks remember the Grow New Jersey program, this is sort of the next iteration that follows behind it. I think Grow New Jersey left with degrees of kind of perceived conflict in terms of were a lot of businesses able to meet their obligations, and was that being captured, recorded, and verified. NJ Emerge specifically looks to, to rectify those problems, or the potential problems. But the other thing that's important about NJ Emerge is that it does create a per job tax credit for businesses, even smaller businesses that Grow New Jersey didn't capture. So some of the older programs look to businesses that have 200 to 300 employees. The NJ Emerge program will look down to companies that have more 20 employees or 10 employees, things like that. So it's really much more achievable. And to your point, Tim, businesses that are located in opportunity zones or specific carve-outs in the state will have additional bonuses on it. So the potential award is up to $8,000 per employee for businesses in certain geographies.
We had a quick question back to the Evergreen Fund. So do you help bring the entrepreneurs to the Evergreen investors, or is this something for an entrepreneur to make their potential investors aware of this benefit?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, it's a little bit of both. We work as hard as we can to try and expose the New Jersey companies to the world and the world to New Jersey-based companies and let them know what's here. The idea is, if you're an entrepreneur, just like, hopefully you put a bullet point in your deck about the Angel Investor Tax Credit Program, which an institutional VC could capture. Hopefully you can put a line in there as well and let them know that, the New Jersey Innovation Evergreen Fund is here. Managers are going to want to know about it. Like I said, we're not just looking for free co-investment with the fund. We're actually, putting up market rate fees and carry with it too. We want to incentivize the managers to invest here.
Gotcha. Do you help get mentor hours with investors or entrepreneurs?
Under Evergreen specifically or generally?
I think just generally speaking.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned that. So, like I said, we didn't have founders and funders in 2020 at all, unfortunately. And I kind of glossed over part of, and again, Tim, you can kind of verify this. Part of the interest in founders and funders is not just the meetings that we arrange, but it's kind of the conversations that happen at the coffee table, so to speak. It's the people that you're not, scheduled or programmed to meet that might have kind of common interests, common opportunity to engage, basically. So we didn't arrange any sort of a face-to-face in that case. One thing that we did start, I guess it was end of 2019, early 2020, was a Golden Seeds chapter in New Jersey. Golden Seeds is an angel group focused on investing in predominantly woman-owned businesses. We do have office hours through that on a monthly basis, where hopefully, predominantly, again, women-owned businesses will register and they have the opportunity to engage with investors during office hours, kind of in a group of 3 or 4. We are thinking about different ways that we can host sort of a virtual founders and funders until we can kind of until we know we can get back in person. It's a lot of work putting that event together, and we don't really want to go for the full in-person planning event until we know that we can actually. So if anybody has any ideas, let me know.
Yeah, it's funny. Dean has been throwing in a lot of these questions. And speaking of founders and funders, and to your point of you kind of meet other people that you didn't expect to meet. When we were up there in Princeton is when I met Dina for the first time. And we were talking and it was just like, hey, what are you up to? What are you up to? And I live in Linwood, grew up in Summers Point, and she's like, I'm from Summers Point. And that was like one of our reasons for wanting to bring Startup Grind down to Atlantic City, was because why should two entrepreneurs that live in the same town down near Atlantic City have to meet in Princeton when we're trying to build our own startup? You know what I mean? So it just kind of goes full circle with what you're saying. And, like you said, you meet people that you didn't expect to meet. And it kind of really started the venture for us to bring Startup Grind to Atlantic City and try to bring that home for us down here. So, Josh, I don't know if you want to jump in, if you have any questions or comments on some of the conversation we've been having, but I'll give him a second to get his thoughts together. Any other programs or new state litigations, or I'm sorry, legislations that we talked about. Yeah, maybe some litigations. I don't know.
Not my business. Yeah, I mean, it is interesting, incidentally, since you and Dina met up in Princeton. You had to go all that way, and you kind of met up, and you found out that this was all going on closer to home. You know, it's part of the impetus for us having launched a Golden Seeds chapter. Golden Seeds New York was obviously the big chapter in the country. And we'd go to networking events up there and you'd start talking to people, and then 5 o'clock would roll around and they go, "Oh yeah, I got to jump on the train back to New Jersey." And half the room would say, "Yeah, I got to jump on the train back to New Jersey." So we said, "All right, let's start a startup grind event over here." Actually, that's part of it. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting to think of different opportunities. One of the things that we started to do before the pandemic hit was create more networking groups and more opportunity for entrepreneurs to collaborate, kind of, not only geographically but also win sectors, especially. We got a long way with efforts in the cybersecurity piece as well, actually. So that's another piece, especially down in your neck of the woods. With again, you've got Atlantic City nearby, sports and e-gaming. It's huge in Atlantic City, especially. So that's an area that's blossoming down there for certain, and getting a lot of attention down there. So hopefully we'll see a lot more activity in that space as well.
Yeah, I was going to say, outside of what you just mentioned, are there any other verticals or industries that you're seeing, especially down in our neck of the woods? You kind of mentioned the FAA Center and aviation and those kind of things. I know wind, the energy, and the blue economies, big conversations down here. So have you seen anything that's specifically, people have ideas that they could, maybe kind of have them come to fruition down here?
Yeah, it's clean energy in the southern portion of the state is bar none seeing a huge investment. There's two projects specifically down there. There's a facility opening up in Paulsboro. They've already broken ground on it, actually, in terms of building wind turbines. So the wind economy is huge down in New Jersey, or going to be. There's also another project that is, I'll stretch and kind of go revolutionary for the East Coast, honestly, in terms of a wind port development setting up. It's more on the Delaware Bay area, but I think the Atlantic Ocean is kind of has a lot of interest in the wind space, setting up turbines and things like that. Definitely requires specific infrastructure to set that up, and New Jersey is really ideally positioned along the sort of the Mid-Atlantic region to do this. Building and transporting those wind turbines requires specific methods and proximity to be able to set those up. They're huge, and it just so happens one of those projects has already been launched down in the southern portion of the state, kind of sharing a property with a PSE&G owned property. That'll bring about $1.5 billion to the region, and I don't know how many jobs, but that's a huge exposure for the region. I think esports and gaming is huge. Obviously, in Atlantic City, is getting a tremendous amount of attention right now too. But that's bar none the biggest, I think. So.
Right. So we have about 10 minutes left. I don't know if anybody has any other comments or questions, or anything they want to ask Tim. Feel free to jump in on the chat.
It usually happens when you bring government violence like that. Like, all right, well, I'll threaten to talk about another program. Okay.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I keep wanting to bring up the co-working space situation. I just feel like, especially with with Stockton having its campus in Atlantic City now, a way to try to keep students when they graduate in our area. You have this talent that you've brought to the city. You've had them kind of spend a couple of years there, and now it's time for them to graduate, and they all just bounce. And we don't want to see that. So I don't know if you can
Mhm.
throw in a good word for some funding for some co-working spaces, but it's just
Yeah. It's not even that actually. It's a sign of a good host because you're jogging things in my memory as we're going here. Actually, so good for you. One of the things, not only talking about the college graduates, this Division of Labor has their whole opportunity to support graduates and people in the state of New Jersey. Another program that we did stand up at the beginning of last year was the NJ Accelerate program. Basically, it's our opportunity to partner with accelerators to make sure that they know about the talent that's here in New Jersey, and likewise let the companies that are here in New Jersey have the opportunity to get exposure to different accelerators. I think it's pretty well known. Companies that go through accelerator programs have, statistically higher chance of success in terms of fundraising, in terms of revenue generation early on in life. There's a whole bunch of metrics that support a company going through an accelerator program. Not least of all, typically an accelerator comes with funding as well. So we developed the NJ Accelerate program. New Jersey doesn't have a ton of accelerators. Probably you could count the number of accelerators on one hand. We've got a few more if you consider corporate. Actually, we do have a great corporate community. Um, Basically, a company that goes to an accelerator is typically early stage in their life. They get tremendous mentoring opportunities. There's usually a structured cohort that goes into, how to approach an investor, tips on strategy for selling and execution. Um, so, a business that applies to an accelerator typically is going to go away to that accelerator. It's usually in person. These days, it's probably virtual, but that might only be temporary. What happens when a business goes through an accelerator program is that they get all this great support, they get all this exposure and this great network, and then they stick around, they stay where they are. So if a New Jersey entrepreneur is accepted to an accelerator out in the valley or over in New York, they've got their network, they've got their resources, and they're probably going to stay there, and so we lost them. So that's the unfortunate part. So what we tried to do with Accelerate is say, number one, hey, look, accelerators, we've got all these great businesses in New Jersey. Why don't you come take a look at them? So in order to do that, we're incentivizing accelerators with $100,000 in annual sponsorships, basically. That says, look, if you come host a demo day, if you come host a networking day here in New Jersey, then we've got sponsorship dollars for you to do that. And accelerators are happy to do that because it's their way of expanding their pipeline, right? Meanwhile, the benefit for the company is that companies that go through an approved accelerator program can receive up to $250,000 in funding from New Jersey, and they can also again receive free rent to locate in one of those approved NJ Ignite collaborative workspaces. Basically, because they're a graduate from an accelerator program. Accelerators are happy to become approved accelerators because more often than not, they don't care where their companies grow up. They care that they have the support that they need and that they are growing up just the right way, right? If a company is successful in New Jersey versus successful out in Silicon Valley, Techstars isn't necessarily going to care where that company grew up. They just care that the company has a multiples of return on capital, basically, at the end of the day. And that the product that came from that business is gone on to take on a life of its own. So the idea is, look, we want to showcase the talent that we have here, and we want to showcase the accelerators that are out there that can support these different businesses. And exactly to your point, they're going to go away, get that education, and then come back here, basically. So.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned Techstars. Our December event was with Jason Towns, who is one of the directors for Techstars, and Josh can speak to this better than I can. But we've been trying to get them on the horn and have a Atlantic City accelerator sponsored by Techstars. But to learn about NJ Accelerate and have them maybe put up some funds for some sponsorship is definitely some good information. So Elizabeth had a comment and a question. There are a lot of efforts to expand tech education and the New Jersey STEM pathways cohort in Atlantic City. How do we pull those efforts together? Do we need a brick and mortar location post COVID? And Dina chimed in and said, is the NARTP a possible partner location?
Yeah, it's interesting. So it's a little bit outside my realm of expertise. NARTP, I think, is probably, I think it's a partnership with NJII and Stockton University, actually. So that I think they would be open to working. It's a pretty impressive space. They definitely were very forward thinking when they built it out. So from a physical perspective, that's something interesting. Otherwise, from the first part of the question, I think it's probably always an opportunity to engage the state higher education office. So.
Great. Any other questions or anything we have for Tim for the last couple minutes here? Throw them up. If not, I would just like to, say on behalf of myself and Josh and the rest of us on the Startup Grind team here in Atlantic City that we truly appreciate your time. A lot of great information. I'm going to try to throw a lot of these bullet points into an email, and I'll include your email on there, as long as that's okay for people to reach out and with any questions or anything like that. Josh, you want to jump in and say something real quick?
Yeah, well, I have one question actually. I was on silent. I forgot that I was on mute and my video was off. But I just wanted to ask one question, and that's like, to be honest, I mean, I need to ask this question. Okay, how do you feel? And maybe this is a question for both of you, but Tim Rowland, I want you to really answer this honestly as much as you can. How do you feel that we can build the confidence of minority communities to chase ambitious problems? Because it seems like institutions have scared people from wanting to think big, and it's really destroyed the entrepreneurial community potential in Atlantic County and New Jersey as a whole. And when I tell people that Progresso and Welch's were started in South Jersey, they're mind blown. It's like, oh yeah. And I could name a lot of, Caucasian and Asian institutions that were launched in New Jersey. And it's surprising that in minority communities, they're very scared to step outside this idea of, I need to be a 40-40-40 plan, work at a job for 40 years with 40 hours a week, retire 40% of my income. So I really love to hear your perspective on how can we enrich the minds of young and middle-aged minorities to chase big problems and be confident that even if they don't have a degree, the money, or anything, that literally just by coming up with an idea on their napkin, like people do in Silicon Valley and other places, that they can change the world.
Yeah, it's a good question. It's a big question too. It's definitely outside my expertise for the most part. Yeah, it's definitely an effort that the state has underway. I mean, I glossed over a lot of the program. Honestly, a lot of the programs. I said we have 29 programs, and I glossed over a bunch of them. But it's definitely, from a programmatic standpoint, one thing that the EDA and the state on the whole is trying to do is to encourage greater engagement, I guess, among I think, Josh, probably to your point, kind of the less engaged communities or the under-engaged communities, I guess is probably a better way to say. So there's definitely a lot of efforts underway there. In particular, I'll mention I was on a call, listening in on a call actually earlier. Lenore Richardson, I guess, is it Richards or Richardson? I'm sorry if I got the name wrong. At Rutgers University, started a Black and Latinx Angel Fund is one effort. The state of New Jersey, in particular, also has a $10 million appropriation in the governor's budget for a Black and Latinx Seed Fund as well, actually, which we're probably, which we have a study underway for right now with Rutgers University. So, I mean, there are individual programmatic efforts we can point to. As I said before, when I was talking about the Evergreen Fund, innovation can come from anywhere, right? Whether it's an early stage startup or somebody working within a department of a large corporation, or like you're saying, somebody writing, their idea on the back of a napkin. The idea is it's out there, and we got to do our best to tap into it. Again, in my world, it's programmatic and institutional, but we do the best we can, reaching out to different communities and trying to figure out, look, what works on the ground level, what works at anybody's level, and let's see what we can do to kind of support that or stir that on. I don't know. Tim, any thoughts?
No, I mean, I know I kind of looked at the mission of the NJEDA, and they talk about, inclusivity and all those kind of things. And that's definitely one of the values of Startup Grind as well. So, I feel like there are It's getting people involved, getting people to feel comfortable to come to
Mhm.
yourself, myself, Josh, people that are out there trying to, quote unquote, spread the good word. But we have to definitely do a better job of making people feel like they can come to us. And that's kind of what Startup Grind we're trying to do, is just have a platform where people can become part of our group and our ecosystem and our family, and feel included. So definitely what we're all working for. So, with that said, really appreciate your time and all your knowledge. Like I said, I'll definitely reach out to everybody, include your contact info in the email, and get a lot of these bullet points out that you touched on tonight. And just want to say thanks again for your time.
Yeah, likewise, Tim and Josh. Thanks very much. Appreciate the opportunity.
All right.